but it has been, stop watching Fox or CNN or whatever you watch when they crazy.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of TRD Talks Live. I'm Eric Enquist, Senior Managing Editor at The Real Deal, and I'm happy to be joined today by three of the top lobbyists in New York City, Suri Kasirer, Michele DeMille, and Jonathan Bing. And before I introduce the panelists, just a reminder to everyone, we do bring these to you for free, but to make that possible, we do need you to subscribe. So if you're not already a Real Deal subscriber, please go to therealdeal.com and click on subscribe. Very easy to do. So welcome to everyone. I'm just going to give some quick introductions to the extent that that's possible, considering your resumes are so long. But Suri, let me start with you. You're the president of Kasirer, Inc. For most of the past decade, your firm has been the #1 top grossing lobbying firm in New York City. You have been ranked #1 more than any other firm, which is not bad considering you founded this firm from your apartment in 1997. So you were a special assistant to Governor Cuomo, not this Governor Cuomo, the first Governor Cuomo. And your client list includes 101 companies just in real estate and construction. In fact, I went through the list and every single letter of the alphabet was represented except for X, Y, and Z. So you literally have everything covered. Michele DeMille is the principal of Geto and DeMille, which you co-founded in 1980, which is hard to believe. It is one of New York's best-known lobbying firms. Before that, Michele was a top official at the agency that is now Empire State Development, which is the one that decides who gets to stay open and who doesn't in New York State. And of course, she has also advised countless developers and other real estate companies through the development approval process. And I counted 59 real estate clients on your website, which was a who's who of the biggest names in the industry. And finally, Jonathan Bing, who is a former assemblyman, is now a shareholder at Greenberg, Traurig, an international law firm with more than 300 lawyers just in New York, and a lobbying powerhouse, without a doubt. He was elected to 5 terms in the state assembly, and he had 35 of his bills signed into law. He has clients in the hospitality and entertainment industries, including bars and restaurants on Broadway as well. So thank you to everyone for joining us. I want to start, we're going to talk a lot of politics and real estate today, which is, they're very related, and that's why you guys are in business. But first, I want you to tell me a little bit, and Suri, you could start with how your business has changed during this pandemic. So in the last 7-8 weeks, what have you guys been up to?
Well, look, the essence of what we do is the same. We're strategists, we're connectors, we build coalitions of support to help achieve our clients' goals. But as a colleague of mine said, they call it lobbying for a reason, because you're supposed to sort of be in the lobby, talking to people in government. And obviously there are no lobbies. So you can't just grab somebody at City Hall or 250 Broadway or at a hearing or at a community board meeting for a quick conversation. So I think, we have been forced to be incredibly creative. We spend most of the day from 7 in the morning till 7 at night on Zoom calls. We have been doing roundtables and webinars, virtual lobbying days. We did a workforce advisory committee. We had 30 people for a project in Long Island City, a 2-hour webinar live. We had the regional administrator of the SBA come and talk to our clients on a webinar to discuss the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP.
It sounds like you've been busier. So you've basically been busier than you even were beforehand. Is that fair to say? Is that true for you, Michele?
Yeah,
Michele,
exactly.
Is that also true for you?
We get up, we get to our computer screens and get on the phone, and we don't leave for 12 hours. It's been very, very intense. And I will say that in addition to many of the things that Suri talked about, we've also been very involved with connecting our real estate clients to their communities, in the sense that there's been a huge amount of generosity and philanthropy, and we've been arranging for boxes and shiploads of foods to communities throughout the 5 boroughs, and trying to help where it's necessary. And that's a gratifying piece of what we do.
And Jonathan, how have things changed for you and your clientele? Like, what have you been doing the last 7-8 weeks?
Suri stole all my best material. I was going to make the 250 Broadway, standing in the lobby of 250 Broadway comment too. I was going to actually go back and talk about the development of the word lobbying from British Parliament and President Grant at the Willard Hotel, but she already,
most people don't realize where the term comes from, but it really does come from hanging out in the lobby, waiting for important people to come out and then grabbing them for their ear. But go ahead, Jonathan.
But to Suri and Michelle's comments, we're part of a law firm, so we actually keep track of our hours specifically as part of a law firm. And my billable hours, even though most of our clients are real estate clients and others are on the government relations clients are on monthly retainers, my work, the hours that I'm billing are up 33 to 50% in March and April versus before March and April. So we've definitely been busy, and being part of a law firm, I think has been especially, connected me. This crisis connected me to parts of the law firm. I've only been at Greenberg Traurig since September, so this was a very quick introduction to the firm. I have a client that's one of the big 4 advertising firms, and they need to know whether they can film a commercial in 5 or 6 different states and whether they're considered essential businesses. So I've been reaching out to colleagues in Sacramento and Austin and Atlanta and DC. We also have a federal lobbying practice as well, and they've been advising a huge number of our clients on the PPP program, as Suri mentioned,
right?
As to whether so it really has increased my relationship to the firm. But I think that it's also important, what we do is even more important now, because if a legislator or an agency person wants to avoid you now, it's even easier to do than before when you can't stand in a place where you can bump into them. So the fact that we have the relationships and the trust with people in government, whether it's elected officials or government staff, is very helpful to our real estate clients to make sure that their needs are still being met, even at a time where if you don't have the phone number of the person you need, you might not be able to get in touch with them.
Well, I'm curious as to how you feel government is responding. I know you deal mostly with state and local government, and sometimes I guess just having covered business for the last 15 years, I get the impression that they don't really, many of the elected officials don't seem to identify with business people that well. They don't seem to just understand what they do. And I guess that's part of your job to try to get them to understand that. But what's just interested in your reactions to how they've been able to, or have they been able to put themselves in the shoes of business people during this crisis? Because it seems like a lot of the attention is on tenants and other folks, and the business has kind of taken a hit.
Look, I think it's super important to make the point that recovery, certainly from the mayor's perspective, he's viewing recovery through the lens of creating a more equitable society when things come back. But it is essential that we all, as advocates, make the point that the revenue side of the balance sheet is very, very important. The city collects $31.9 billion of revenue from the real estate community. It is 52% of all of the taxes that the city collects. It's enough to pay the entire municipal workforce. So, large-scale economic development projects that all of us are working on is what's going to put people back to work. So if folks care about the workers, you're going to help the owners as well. And I think we're all working really, really hard to make those points that it's those economic development projects that should be a priority in recovery. And I think we've all been working on putting together those lists of what are those projects that are going to really get the most people back to work the quickest.
Yeah, go ahead, Michele.
No, I was going to say, I couldn't agree more with that. And to that end, I think it's going to be really crucial to figure out a way of reinstituting ULURP relatively quickly.
Right, that's the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure for our folks who don't know. It's a 7-month approval process that you have to go through anytime you want to do a major project that requires a rezoning. And it's decided by the city council at the end of those 7 months. And right now we are frozen. I mean, so you have clients who are in the middle of that ULURP process and they're just on hold?
Exactly. And I would say that in addition to the 7 months of community and governmental engagement, there's a whole year in advance in order to be able to get to that point. So it's a long process. And I heard the mayor speak about looking at it anew recently, and I'm hoping that will create some efficiencies that will allow us to get through these processes, because without ULURP and getting some of these important economic development projects in the ground and restarting our economy through the creation of jobs and so on, it's going to be really crucial.
And just to build on Michelle's... Go ahead,
Jonathan. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I was just going to add a brief point. You have to remember, we're also at the backdrop that the end of the de Blasio administration is coming next year. So, in terms of the timeline, which is already tough to meet, we also have an 18 months the end of the de Blasio administration, and really, if it's not certain, a ULURP process is not going to be certified by. If you look back at the last of the Greenberg administration, if a process isn't certified by the spring or April 1st, it's not going to get done. So, any type of pause at any time is going to be difficult for advancing real estate, but especially when you want something to be in the pipeline and certified before the end of the current mayoral administration. Any type of pause, especially right now, it's going to make a very difficult process when things rev up, and we have to be able to focus on the COVID-19 relief, but be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Focus on everything we need to do, but also think about economic development and think about how to get real estate development projects. We can't continue in this everything is no unless you convince me otherwise. We have to start with yes, but here's what we need in order to be satisfied.
I want to get back to that in a second, but before we finish with ULURP and the freeze, is anyone willing to say that this freeze is no longer necessary? I mean, it seems like business is going on. We're meeting right now. Why can't the public approval process continue during this pandemic? I mean, Rent Guidelines Board is still meeting.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree. That's exactly right, Eric. The community boards are meeting. BSA and LPC are meeting. The city council had stated today meeting, and I don't really see why the ULURP process could not be convened pretty.
Have any of you called City Hall and made that point?
Well, I mean, look, city planning has been meeting, and all of us have had meetings with city planning, but it's actually just specifically the ULURP process, which is being frozen. But there are definitely conversations, and I think the longer this goes on, the more government is proving to be nimble. Part of the problem is that so much of government, so much of what government has in terms of archives and so forth is not computerized and digitized. So, for example, if you wanted to get a previous approval from landmarks, a lot of it is on paper. So, that's part of the problem. And the technology in government is really not what it needs to be. And that's another part of the problem. But I also wanted to build on what Michele said, because I think she's so right. And in addition to looking at how the ULURP process can be changed and shortened, I think we also need to look at the EIS process, the environmental review process, which takes an enormous amount of time. There's a limited number of people in government who have this expertise. You wait online for one person basically to review your application. We need more staff. We need more expertise. We need ways of, look, government doesn't have money. That's true. But there've got to be ways that we can look at government efficiency so that we can think about how to move people's projects faster online so that we can get them in the ground and we can be hiring people to do construction and get these projects started.
We had money until 2 months ago, by the way, and I will say the mayor did add a bunch of plan examiners to move things through the Department of Buildings faster. And, I interviewed him one-on-one in 2013 when he was running. And we talked quite a bit about speeding up the pre-ULR process so you could get to certification and get that 7th-month calendar started. I don't know to what extent that has been sped up at all. I mean, it still seems to take more than a year in most cases. So, in the meantime, if you're a developer, you're spending lots of money and you haven't really gotten your project started yet. So I'm not sure how much progress he's made on that. I do wonder if it's ever possible that it could be helpful that your project pauses. There was a big project. The Olnick organization, was about to go down to defeat in the city council. There were days left on the clock. They had a big project, in Lenox Terrace in northern Manhattan, and suddenly this freeze came in. Would that be a chance for you as a lobbyist to sort of maybe work something out with the city council?
Well, look, I'm hopeful, and maybe I'm an optimist, but I'm hopeful that post-COVID, there'll be much more of a willingness to get these projects online and to understand the importance of what they're bringing to local communities. As Michele said, so many of the developers are looking at this time as an opportunity to give back to those communities. We have so many clients that are doing exactly what Michele said. They're feeding the NYCHA residents. They're giving local businesses business. They're, looking at ways of really being creative and giving back to the community. And I'm hopeful that people post-COVID will look more positively at the benefits that development can bring when government has no money.
Yeah, most of the projects we're involved with.
Hold on, let's start with Jonathan. Michele, let's start with Jonathan, and we'll go to you.
Yeah, I think that goes back to where we started. This question is about, what our role is in terms of explaining things to elected officials who may not have, whether it's a business background or a real estate background. I mean, that's really where we are, whether it's the attorneys that are in our practice or the government relations people. That's what we're doing. And I think that, yes, in some cases, if something is going down to a defeat, a pause could be helpful in order for tempers to cool and for a deal to be made. But regardless, right now, every minute, every month is making the possibility of a project being done before the end of the Blasio administration even harder. And that's why, while the focus of the mayor's office has been on COVID-19 issues, as it should be, we have to talk about what's going to happen afterwards. And unlike in crises and after 9/11 and after the Great Recession in 2008, the city's not going to have tourism to save it as it did in those crises, especially there's no sporting events. Broadway, which I do work with, is probably the last thing to come back in such things because of the nature of you can't have a Broadway show without an audience. So in the difficult economic times in the recent years, we've had tourism and sports and Broadway to prop things up, but we're not going to have that right now, and certainly not in the same way for a while. So that's why it's important that the construction development continues and these projects are able to move forward, because that's what's going to be what keeps New York afloat or not.
Yeah, Michele?
I was going to make the point that so many of our projects involve, when you think of development, you often think of, a tall residential building, but that residential building can bring infrastructure improvements and mass transit improvements and public realm improvements and affordable housing and all the things that we're going to need in order to get our economy back to work. And the project that is very near to our hearts that we've been working on for years now is the Gowanus rezoning. We're very, before we weren't in ULR quite at that point, but we were right at the verge of it, of certification, and we're hopeful that immediately upon the freeze being lifted, that we can move forward on that, because the enormous benefits of that rezoning to the community is, I think we can all agree are pretty substantial.
Right. Yeah, go ahead, Suri.
Sorry, the other side to this puzzle is the legislative process, and definitely have some concerns about some of the pieces of legislation that the city council has been looking at, and really been working hard at trying to make sure that, as much as we want to take care of the small flower shop that may not ever reopen, we also want to make sure that multinational corporations and international corporations that have the money to pay rent. We all have an obligation in this society to keep the economy going. There are many companies that have been receiving PPP, and some of that money is supposed to go to pay rent. So, I think that we've also been very active in working with local legislators, both on the city and on the state, to really make sure that they understand that the rhetoric influences people's actions. And we have multinational corporations that are not paying rent.
Are there any
and
particular
that's not
bills?
acceptable.
Well, are there any particular bills that concern you? I mean, right now, the city council, as we speak, is passing a bill or just passed a bill that would force employers to pay more for the people who are now working. I mean, I don't know if that's even constitutional.
Well, that bill wasn't today, but a bill was.
That's not going forward today. There were two bills that went forward today. That's personal liability.
Personal liability. You can walk away from a lease.
Right.
You can walk away from a lease owing money, and they can't come after you.
There's two on tenant harassment. One is residential and one is commercial. Yeah. So, it's just really making sure that there's a balanced approach. The same way we want to take care of the small guy, we also want to make sure that that person that can pay does pay.
Yeah, we want to make sure that there aren't any...
Go ahead, Jonathan. Hold on, Michele.
The bill that passed today that Suri made reference to allows leases to be broken due to COVID-19 related reasons. And obviously, if you're talking about somebody who's lost their job or has been ill, an individual, of course, that's somebody who's very sympathetic. But what about commercial tenants in buildings, in residential buildings? There are 3,300 commercial buildings that have commercial tenants in them, and if they are able to walk out of a lease, if they're big multinational corporations or your local or your chain drugstore or chain or other chain store, those 3,300 buildings those rents are being partially subsidized by that commercial tenant. The commercial tenant can use one of the bills passing today as a means of getting out of the lease, for some sort of loose connection to the pandemic that we're all struggling with. That's going to be devastating to real estate for the developers as well as the management companies, as well as the tenants who part of their rent now being paid by the commercial tenant in their building is now going to go away, and that those costs are going to be borne by the residents of the building.
Michele, do you find that legislators are receptive to it? Can you how easy is it to get these people in a meeting or on the phone to sort of explain this? Like, how much time do they have to hear information that they don't necessarily want to hear because it doesn't really help them to get reelected? Because these are things that don't play well for their constituents necessarily.
But that hasn't changed, from pre-COVID to post-COVID times. And what Suri said before, that, we have to continue to be advocates, and now we're doing it over a screen or on a telephone rather than in a lobby or in an office building. And many of them are receptive to the points that we have to make. We have to be careful about the unintended consequences of some of these legislations. We did a piece this morning in a grocery store in Bed-Stuy, where those workers have huge protections, have gotten wonderful bonuses. It's a wonderful supermarket operation, and a local council member came and was part of an interview, and he said, that the razor-thin margins that these groceries operate under might kill the store. Now, I don't think that's what anybody intends through this legislation, and we're bringing those kinds of situations to their attention, and I think there's a lot of receptivity.
There is a lot of sympathy in the council for small businesses, but there's some point where if your business is big enough, then suddenly you get no sympathy anymore. If you think of small landlords, no one wants to hurt them, but big landlords, oh, fine, we can hurt them. I mean, some of you have multifamily, landlord clients. So, what have you been advocating on their behalf in terms of bills, cancel rent bills, defer your rent for a year kind of bills? Like, what are you telling them?
Well, look, I mean, we've just seen the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus came out with their recommendations. The pied-à-terre tax is back on the table. The millionaires tax is back. There's no doubt that there's a perception that, developers are rich, they're greedy, they can afford it, they can, they should pay more. And I think there isn't an understanding that, some of the bills that passed Albany in the last session are really going to take a toll. And with COVID on top of it, the industry needs to continue to make the point that the city really counts on real estate taxes to help pay for everything. And
do you think if Amazon came down the pike? Let me ask you something. Does anyone think that if Amazon came in with a project like, I don't know, next spring when unemployment's at 20%, everyone's looking for jobs, that it would have gotten a better reception?
Look, there's no doubt that
we've learned, probably yes.
Yes and no.
There's a lot of people that are looking back thinking if only we had Amazon today.
And there are some people that wouldn't
said
have,
yes,
that even
probably
with this crisis wouldn't make. Yeah. Sorry.
And probably some of those people who fought against it. Although I'm not sure if they would admit it. But
yeah, I think there still would be some people opposed to it regardless of that. But as Suri said, 50% or more than 50% of New York City revenues are from property taxes. And, if these landlords aren't able to pay it, rent is going to be canceled. And so I think the cancel rent effort, has, I wouldn't say it's sputtered, but it hasn't sort of gotten as much, backing as perhaps it would be, because I think that, due to the work of people like us, folks who are in elected officials understanding that a lot of the landlords are small landlords, multifamily houses, and, need the rent in order to be able to pay their mortgages and property taxes. But also, yes, we are finding out now that things that were part of the 2019 rent regulation reform in the state legislature, are coming back and finding out that it doesn't work. I mean, we have one client that wanted to provide more affordable housing at a development, and the 421A changes last year made it illegal for them to provide the lower income thresholds that in order for them to be able to follow the deal they made with the local the local neighborhood organizations of the community. So think the laws that passed last year, there were certainly unintended consequences, and in some ways actually made affordable housing less affordable when the state legislature took its action.
Look, the question.
You mentioned multifamily properties, and we represent some, and others on this panel, I'm sure, do as well. And we've been spending a great deal of time advocating, trying to figure out what the solutions are, so that it protects both the landlord, who have to maintain their buildings and keep them safe, and the tenants, of course, who are suffering. And we've been advocating on behalf of the expansion of the Section 8 program, for instance. And we're thrilled to see the Congress's program released today that did devote huge resources and helping to move along. So, all of us are involved with public policy resolutions to some of these tough challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to thank you for mentioning that, Michele. I want to make mention, we're doing a lot of work with the restaurants, and we represent an association trying to come up with solutions and ideas for how to help the restaurants get back. And so many of them are really giving back, opening up, to help with frontline workers, their families, hospital, folks that are working in hospitals and so forth. But for a lot of them, they're going to need help to open up again. And if we don't get these folks opened, many of their employees are immigrants, and they don't really have work in other industries. And so it's a really of serious concern. And lots of these restaurants are part of development projects. So, we're really working hard, as Michele said, in terms of coming up with very, very specific solutions.
We have more than 27,000 restaurants. A lot of them are paying rent to even residential buildings above them, or office buildings are an important important component of street life and a lot of other things. I wondered if you're involved in all in that attempt to limit Grubhub and Seamless charges, because right now restaurants are completely dependent on takeout, and almost all of them use Grubhub or Seamless or one of the others, and they're trying to get a bill passed that would limit the commissions that these apps can take. Are you involved in that at all?
Isn't that one of the ones that got passed today?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was passed today.
It was passed today.
There's an
Yeah, we've been
irony,
very
isn't
involved in
there?
that.
Don't you think that's a little bit ironic? Because, this is usually when we hear from the business sector, it's like, no, you can't come in and overregulate us and decide what fees we charge and things like that. But this time the restaurants were on the other side of that coin. They're saying, yeah, please come regulate another business that's charging us. So do you think that's kind of a double-edged sword?
Well, it's just a
I think it's what
concern
they
that
have to do to survive. I mean, we represent, I handle a number of, liquor license and agency and other and unrelated licenses matters. And, they're doing what's necessary to survive. As another bill that passed today, which actually was a good pro-business move, was to waive sidewalk cafe fees for the year. So because obviously in-house restaurants are not happening, and paying for sidewalk cafes that don't that can't be utilized doesn't make sense. So not every bill that we've been discussing today or passed today is something that has been antagonistic business. That actually was pro-business. But I think that that it's especially important. This is something that has existed. This didn't happen because of COVID-19. This issue has been around for a while, and it's something that has made these businesses difficult for them to operate under normal circumstances, let alone under a pandemic where they can't have in-house restaurants. There's also another effort that's been mentioned, led by Keith Powers, that would potentially use streets to be able, for outdoor cafe purposes. And I think is there may be he's asked for a pilot project in his district, so again, that's things like that, or things that whether it's real estate related or not, that thinking of how to advance economic development during this time is something that we have to think of out-of-box solutions like that.
Especially post-pandemic, thinking about what the restaurants can do outdoors is incredibly important to the restaurants.
Yeah, and if you just allow them to do sidewalk cafes, that would restrict the amount of space on the sidewalks. And right now we don't want pedestrians to be restricted, walking really close together. So if you want a social distance, I think that, you got to open up the streets to do that. And it was like pulling teeth to get the mayor to do that. And eventually Corey Johnson, the city council, were able to pressure him along with some other forces. And, that now open streets is being expanded. But a lot of people are not thinking about the restaurants in terms of that, but it would actually be a big benefit to them. If you had, you've been to Europe, right, where you have many, many streets closed to traffic, and there are just tons of people milling about under normal circumstances, and they're sitting down at cafes and going to restaurants all the time. So you think that maybe you could push something like that through. So that's an interesting thought. I wondered, on the budget side, obviously, the only one who has money right now is Washington. Albany's broke, city council's broke. They've got multi-billion-dollar deficits. Is that something that concerns you, that you can do anything about? Because obviously, a lot of what you do is you try to get funding for your clients, and now you're going to be greeted with, well, there is no funding. It's now you're trying to stave off cutbacks, are you not?
Our focus is really very much the city government, but I have to say we have been spending an enormous amount of time talking to both senators and their staffs and the New York congressional delegation to make them aware of some of the needs of the not-for-profit community, the hospitals, the real estate community, small businesses, large businesses, and others. And I think that we are all very, very focused on Washington and realize that that's where the hope is right now.
Yeah, and I think that, being part of a national government relations practice like we are, it's especially important because we have, in both in DC, New York, Albany, and major state capitals have government relations practices. So, exactly right. We have New York clients that have in the real estate and other industries that are utilizing our federal lobbying practice for this purpose. The difference between New York and other states versus the federal government is that we can't print money. only the federal government can. So there will, everything, with the controller released a report today about significant deficits. The governor has been beating this drum. Right now it's really to sort of force the federal representatives from New York to make sure that there is direct funding for the states in whether it's the fourth or the fifth or whatever stimulus package is coming up next. And I think that, right now, it's become sort of a nationwide effort for our clients in real estate and entertainment, in hospitality, whatever the industry is, utilizing whether they came from New York or another state. They're now working with our DC office to make sure that their industry, is addressed. And when it comes to real estate, the House Democratic package is $100 million for renters. Obviously, if something like that could actually see its way through to passage, that would make a huge difference and potentially be able to advance real estate in New York.
Yeah, do you think that would go ahead, Michele?
I would just say the good news is that we've been able to continue communicating with city council members, because that's the key budget that our nonprofits look to for so much of their funding, and getting them to explain how they've transitioned to remote services and helping their vulnerable populations, and we've been able to continue that dialogue. I mean, I think the council is weighing Plan A and Plan B right now. One much more drastic than the other. The budget reductions, if the federal government really comes through with help to cities and states, is going to mean that, fewer dire cutbacks. Either way, it's going to be a tough budget, but it's certainly going to be a very big difference.
The hazard pay bill you mentioned before, Eric, that would give a premium to essential workers. There's no exception for nonprofits. So it's something. Obviously, paying more to essential workers is something that we all support. But you have nonprofits, home care agencies that have a direct reimbursement from the state. That's not going up. So if you say that their essential workers have to be paid more, they're not getting any more money from the state. Where is that going to come from? You have nonprofits that are, obviously private fundraising for nonprofits is going to be down markedly. So it's not something that can be, these additional costs can't be passed on to other sources. So obviously, paying more and supporting those who are putting their lives at risk for all of us is very important, but there needs to be some source of revenue in order to do so. And that's why we're advocating for, on behalf of nonprofits that we represent, making sure that these premium pay bills exempt nonprofits or exempt at least certain nonprofits from the jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Or have government commit if our government contracts to pay that.
You obviously spend a lot of time advocating for your real estate clients, but a lot of them have made life harder for you, I would say, in terms of public image and, the political reception they get from Albany and from the city council. Now, I'm just going to run through, I'm going to mention 5 things that I think have made your life difficult if you're advocating for real estate clients. One is mechanical voids, where people build buildings really tall by having, floors and floors of just empty space to get around. So there was legislation on that. The gerrymandered tax lots, which, you put these Frankenstein lots together in order to make a building that's, 3 times taller than any building near it. The deregulation of rent stabilized apartments, which is now over, but went on for years. That got real estate a bad reputation. A couple other things. Condo projects, they're all so many 4,000 square foot apartment projects, no affordable housing at all. So you get, this impression that everything's like a billionaire's row kind of development. So that gave development a bad name. And then the pied-à-terres, which you mentioned, I know you don't want the pied-à-terre tax to pass, but you have these whole buildings where there's almost no one living in them. And, we have a housing crisis. So how do you overcome these issues when you walk and sit down with a lawmaker and they start bringing these things up? What do you say? Or do you ever go to your clients and say, what, can you guys tone it down a little bit? You're making it hard for us.
Look, I think so many of the developers are so philanthropic. They are such an important part of the civic life in New York. They are large employers. They are large taxpayers. They are doing so much during this pandemic to give back to the city. And the development community has always been leaders in civic life, whether it's sitting on not-for-profit boards or contributors to life. in New York City. They love the city, they care about the city, and they've always had a very special relationship with government. I think this is a sort of blip in a kind of much longer history. And I think it's super important to make sure that we're telling their story. But at the end of the day, they are very, very large employers. And if you want to help the employees, you have to sometimes also help the businesses that employ the employees.
Yeah. Do you think it's a blip, Jonathan? Or
No, because I think that it's not necessarily a blip because I think it's also part of a trend. I mean, we have seen with the election of Mayor De Blasio, with a very progressive city council, and then with the Democratic control of the state Senate making the all state government blue. It's definitely been a trend, and we represent REBNY, we represent a number of development companies, both on the state and city level, and it's definitely something that we have to we're often starting with no and having to turn it to a yes. So we sometimes for other clients we start with yes and then explain why it should stay yes. So I think it is important, and I think that it's even though it's absolutely right. Real estate interests are very, very philanthropic. They're going to be the folks that are going to support New York during this crisis. But it is a difficult effort sometimes to advance the cause of real estate. And the fact that we have as a former elected official, certainly it helps me get indoors that I wouldn't be able to get in otherwise, even if an elected official or an agency head doesn't, may not like my client or my issue, they're still willing to talk to me and hear what I have to say because of having been on their side of the table and knowing what it's like to face the pressures that they're under. So I do think that in this current climate, both on the state and city level, it does take work, but often we're able to, and maybe not get everything we want, but at least, on behalf of real estate clients, be able to move the needle considerably based on the fact that they trust us and they're not going.
Go ahead, Michele. Can I turn the tables on you, Eric, for a moment? It's so easy to raise the 5 issues that you did because they've been such a top topics of conversation over the last and in the press for the last year or two. But what gets much less press is all the wonderful things that are part of the development projects that we're involved with. I mean, the extraordinary architecture and the advances in sustainability and resiliency that come along with the projects that we're involved with, and new parks that get created as part of the Domino Sugar Factory and other projects that we've long been involved with. So it's harder to get all those positive elements of development through the media.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned. I wish you could spend
a little more time on talking about all the wonderful contributions made by development, including the jobs, of course, that we bring to the table.
It's funny that you mentioned that because it almost seems like these amenities that are now attached to a lot of these developments, whether you get a subway station renovated or a new park or something like that, they almost seem like they're being treated as entitlements, like, yeah, we'll let you build our building, and of course you owe us all of these other things. So I'm almost sure if you're not even getting credit for those anymore.
I don't think we are. I agree.
I want to say that I'm optimistic, and I know the Democratic Socialists have scared a lot of elected officials and a lot of our leaders in government. But I'm optimistic that, post-COVID, some of those voices will be a lot softer.
Do you think that they were not as powerful as maybe they seem to some legislators? I
think they created a fear factor, and everybody was sort of moving to the left because they were afraid. There are people who literally endorsed Tiffany Caban and didn't share any of her views. Tiffany Caban believes there should be no jails, that no one should ever go to jail, whether you murder or rape or kill.
She ran for Queens DA. She lost by 55 votes. I mean, it was incredibly, completely.
And there are people who endorsed her who, when you would sit down with them and say, so what do you agree with? There was such a fear factor that AOC and some of these folks created. And I'm just hopeful that, at the end of this, when the economic story is going to be told about how devastated the city is, those voices will be
Right.
much quieter.
Jonathan, you're going to get the last. Jonathan, you're going to get the last word, and then because we got to wrap up. Go ahead.
There were elected officials who signed letters saying, Amazon, please come, who, a few months later were signing letters saying, Amazon, please go. So yes, it definitely had a factor.
I want to just say that I hope that our leaders will bring everybody to the table, because we all now need to sit down and develop solutions that restart our economy. And that should be the goal moving forward.
And I think that's our message collectively. We're problem solvers. We're trying to find solutions to problems and be partners with government.
We're going to have to leave it on that note. So I want to thank all my guests, Suri, Kasirer, Michele, DeMilly, and Jonathan Bing. And a reminder to everyone watching, please go to therealdeal.com and subscribe if you have not already. You can tune back in on Friday. We've got a special edition of 5 o'clock Friday, special edition of TRD Talks Live. We're going inside the newsroom. We're going to hear directly from the Real Deal reporters on how we do our jobs and the stories that we're looking to cover in the future. So please come back Friday, 5 o'clock. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.